On June 7th, 1992, three women, Sherrill Levitt, 47, her daughter Suzanne, 19, and Suzanne's best friend Stacy McCall, 18, mysteriously disappeared from their Springfield, Missouri, home. There was no sign of forced entry or struggle, only an abandoned car, and a strange phone call made from their home shortly after the disappearance. More than 3 decades later, the case remains unsolved, but there are growing signs that a very special psychopath is involved. On June 7th, 1992, in Springfield, Missouri, 3 women mysteriously disappeared. It was a day like any other, but it would forever change the lives of their families, their communities, and their loved ones. It all started out as a peaceful morning, but one dark night, a disappearance without a trace took place, leaving behind thousands of unanswered questions. Now, looking back at this case, we cannot help but feel a chill at the eerie silence of the early days. But what happened that night? And why has no one been able to find these 3 women for 3 decades? It all started when Sherrill Levitt, a 47-year-old woman, her daughter, Suzanne, 19, and Suzanne's best friend, Stacy McCall, 18, decided to spend a relaxing evening together. Suzanne and Stacy had been longtime friends, with a relationship as close as sisters. They decided to go out, while Sherrill, Suzanne's mother, stayed home to prepare everything for that evening. That day, the 3 of them were living in a small house in Springfield, where everyone felt safe and at peace. The house was nothing special, but it was filled with memories of the Levitt family. Sherrill was a wonderful mother, always attentive to her daughter's needs. Suzanne, a passionate young girl, always dreamed of a bright future, while Stacy, her best friend, was always a reliable companion. But in a short moment, everything changed. Along with Stacy, Suzanne promised to return to the house late at night because she had an appointment with a friend. Sherrill didn't think much of it, just wanted a quiet evening to watch TV and relax after a busy week. However, as time passed and the girls still hadn't returned, she felt a strange unease. Around 11 o'clock at night, Sherrill's anxiety increased. Suzanne was not a latecomer, and not telling her mother in advance made her feel anxious. Neither Stacy nor Suzanne had the habit of not calling when they were late, but this time no one called. Sherrill, feeling anxious, decided to call Stacy, but did not receive any answer. She then called Suzanne, but the phone was busy. This was strange because Suzanne rarely left her phone without a signal. At this point, she had a bad feeling. Sherrill immediately decided to drive to the location where the girls had gone. She quickly changed her clothes and drove out, feeling anxious. But the closer she got to the area where the girls had arranged to meet, the more anxious she felt. The streets were deserted and there was no one around. At this point, Sherrill began to sense the terrifying truth. Perhaps something bad had happened to her daughter and her friend. When she arrived, she noticed Suzanne's car parked in a lot, but no one was in it. She walked around the area searching, and then stopped at the house of a friend of Stacy's, hoping to find more information. But all efforts were unsuccessful. No one saw Stacy or Suzanne after they left. At this point, Sherrill began to clearly sense that something was wrong. She returned to her house and called the police. The disappearance had begun, but no one knew that this would be a long, never-ending story, a story that would never end for these 3 women. Police investigate the missing persons. The police arrived at the scene and began their investigation immediately. When they entered Sherrill's house, they found that everything seemed normal. There was no sign of forced entry, no signs of violence or struggle. The items in the house were intact. The television was still on, suggesting that perhaps one of the 3 women had gone somewhere. But what had caused them not to return? The anomalies did not stop there. The police checked the house phones and noticed that a strange call had been made at around 10 p.m. from one of the phones in the house. The call lasted less than a minute, but remarkably, it was not a call from anyone in the family. The caller did not say anything, just listened quietly while a slight noise rang through the receiver. Then the call was disconnected. This call became a strange sign in the investigation. No one knew who the caller was or why they were calling at this point. Was it a kidnapper or some strange coincidence? Doubts and speculations. As the case became a hot topic in the community, theories began to emerge. Some believed that the girls might have left voluntarily, but this did not fit the situation. None of the three women had taken any personal belongings with them. There was no sign of preparation for a long trip, and none of them had any connections that would have caused them to leave so suddenly. Others believed that there might have been a premeditated murder. They noted that Sherrill and Suzanne were both outgoing and friendly women who might have been drawn into a dangerous situation by accident. But no one could have imagined that the three women would be abducted without leaving a trace. Analyzing the strange call and bizarre speculations. The strange call that night became an important factor in the search for the truth. It is worth noting that no one heard any noise during the call. Could this be a signal from the kidnapper, or just a coincidence? Some believe that the perpetrator had been watching their house for a long time before that and knew the habits of the victims. As investigators continued to search and question those involved, more and more strange details emerged. But to this day, there is still no clear explanation for the three women's disappearance without a trace. And the case continues, while questions about the truth remain unanswered. The disappearance of Sherrill Levitt, Suzanne, and Stacy not only shocked Springfield, but also attracted the attention of many people across the United States. A major investigation has been launched, but the truth of this case is still shrouded in mystery. Will we ever find out who the culprit is, or will this story forever remain a big question mark? After the disappearance was reported and the panic of the family and the community reached its peak, the Springfield police immediately launched an investigation. But the truth is, the investigation soon faced obstacles that no one could have foreseen. The first clues they collected, instead of bringing them closer to the truth, only made the case more complicated and confusing. Crime scene investigation. When the police entered Sherrill Levitt's house, they noted something very unusual. Everything seemed normal, with no signs of forced entry or violence. The windows were closed, the doors were intact, and there was no sign of forced entry or forced entry. The objects in the house, from books to everyday items, were arranged in an orderly manner. There seemed to be no disturbance in this space, something that investigators found extremely strange. In particular, the TV was still on, showing a normal entertainment program. This created a sense of uncertainty in the minds of the investigators. They began to speculate whether the three women might have gone out voluntarily, since there were no obvious signs of forced entry. But the inevitable question was, if they went out voluntarily, why didn't they take any personal belongings with them? And why didn't they leave a note or any traces? The investigators decided to check the phone in the house. After a while of searching, they discovered a very strange call that had been made at around 10 p.m. This call, although it lasted less than a minute, was part of the mystery that no one could explain. The call was unanswered, and only a light breathing sound could be heard on the receiver. Then the call was suddenly disconnected. This was the first clue the police could come up with, but it only added to the suspicion. The call became one of the most important details of the case. The police could not determine who the caller was, and this left them puzzled. Was it a kidnapper? Or was there some reason why the three women could not contact their loved ones? Conspiracy theories began to emerge. The bodies and relationships. The police continued to investigate the relationships of the victims, and soon realized something quite remarkable. None of the three women had any obvious grudges against anyone in the community. Sherrill was an outgoing, sociable mother who was always ready to help those around her. Suzanne was a cheerful and enthusiastic young woman, while Stacy, Suzanne's best friend, was a lovely girl, always cheerful and friendly. None of them had any obvious enemies or conflicts in their lives. So what caused these three to mysteriously disappear? Police began investigating the relationships surrounding the victims, but they found no evidence of a strained relationship or a connection to a possible perpetrator. Meanwhile, information about the three women was made public. Reporters began investigating, interviewing people who knew them, but no one could provide useful information. No one knew where the three women had gone, or why they had disappeared without a trace. Suspicion fell on relatives and friends, but no one could provide answers. The ambiguity of the theories. As the investigation dragged on, several theories began to emerge, but none of them could shed light on the case. One of the most popular theories was that the perpetrator might be a family member or close friend of the victims. Investigators began looking at the three women's closest acquaintances. But remarkably, interviews with family members and close friends turned up nothing suspicious. Everyone confirmed that they knew nothing about the disappearance and that the three women had no conflict with anyone during the time leading up to the incident. Another theory is that the three women may have been kidnapped by a criminal who was capable of planning very carefully. According to this theory, the kidnapper had been following the three victims for a long time and knew their habits well. Some investigators even speculated that the kidnapper may have been someone who lived nearby, had a relationship with one of the three women, and took advantage of their trust to commit the crime. However, this theory is still unconvincing because there is no evidence to prove who the kidnapper was, and there are no traces of forced entry into the house. This left investigators with a big question. Were the three women really kidnapped, or did they leave voluntarily? Strange clues. Another strange detail was that Suzanne's car, which she frequently drove, was still parked in the house's parking lot. This was a clue was remarkable. If the three women had left voluntarily, why did Suzanne leave her car behind? And if they had been abducted, why was the car still there, unmoved? To answer this question, investigators began to review all surveillance videos from the surrounding areas. However, despite the abundance of surveillance videos in the area, there was not a single image showing the three women leaving the area that night. This further complicated the case, as there was no trace of where they had gone. The stagnant investigation. Without any clear leads, the investigation began to stall. Police could not proceed without specific information, and the community became increasingly concerned about the safety of the victims. Questions remained unanswered. Why did the three women disappear? Were they kidnapped, or did they leave willingly? And is there a villain lurking in the shadows, plotting their next evil act? Despite many questions and theories, no one has been able to come up with a definitive answer to this mysterious disappearance. The investigation into the disappearances of Sherrill Levitt, Suzanne, and Stacy has become more complicated than ever. With unclear clues and vague theories, this case has become one of the strangest and most unexplained in crime history. Investigators continue to search for the Springfield police, after working for a long time without making significant progress in the investigation of the mysterious disappearances of Sherrill Levitt, Suzanne, and Stacy, decided to take a new approach. They realized that perhaps to better understand this disappearance, they needed to uncover all the relationships, the small traces that might have been overlooked before. The investigation had been going on in a normal process for many weeks, but no one expected that, even in the simplest details, there could be important clues hidden. Investigating the relationships surrounding the victims. The investigator, starting from scratch, took a fresh look at all the relationships of the three women. Suzanne, Sherrill, and Stacy were all very well connected in the community. We all know that in a case like this, identifying relationships can be a big help in determining the motive of the perpetrator. Suzanne and Stacy were best friends for a long time. They grew up together, went to school together, and shared all the secrets of their youth. One of Stacy's best friends was a girl named Amber. Amber and Stacy had a very close relationship, and there was almost no secret they didn't share with each other. After the disappearance, Amber was one of the first people to be investigated, but she claimed that she knew nothing about where her friends had gone. However, investigators discovered something strange. Although Amber claimed that she had no information about the disappearance, she had previously had a heated argument with Stacy about a personal matter. This raised suspicions that perhaps the disappearance of these three women was related to a complicated relationship that no one knew about. However, what investigators realized when investigating the relationships of the three victims was that there was no evidence that they had any serious conflicts with anyone. The relationship between Suzanne and Stacy was extremely close. The two always shared everything in their lives, and there was no sign of any change in their friendship before the day of their disappearance. This made the case even more strange, because if there was no conflict or disagreement, Then why did these three women disappear without leaving a trace? Searching for forgotten traces in the past. When the theories about the relationships did not yield results, the investigators decided to go back to looking for forgotten traces in the victim's past. They began to search for papers, photos, and any other signs that might indicate the presence of a stranger or a particular situation that the victims might have been in. While searching, they discovered something strange. Suzanne, in recent days, had begun to show a change in her behavior. She began to talk more about the new friends she had met at school. Some of Suzanne's friends shared that she seemed to be having some difficulties in her personal life, especially with her family relationships. Could this be related to her decision to leave home? Was Suzanne planning to leave, or was there something very serious that she was not able to share with her mother and friends? The investigators decided to look into Suzanne's new friends. One of the names that emerged in Suzanne's conversations was a guy named Chris. Chris was a new student in Springfield and had become friends with Suzanne over the past few months. Suzanne had been spending a lot of time with Chris, and it became clear that their relationship might be part of the disappearance story. However, as the police investigated Chris, they realized that he had no criminal record. Chris cooperated well with the police, providing information about his conversations with Suzanne and confirming that he had no connection to the disappearance. But surprisingly, as the police continued to investigate the people around Suzanne, they discovered a series of suspicious events related to the calls Suzanne had received in the days leading up to her disappearance. Strange calls and signs of preparation. One of the strange calls the police discovered was on June 5th, 2 days before the three women went missing. The call was made in the afternoon, and from what investigators could confirm, it was from an unknown number. Suzanne never mentioned the call to anyone, and no one knew who the caller was. What was peculiar, however, was that after the call ended, Suzanne had a conversation with her mother, Sherrill, about possibly going on a short trip somewhere, but she did not specify a destination. Sherrill, at the time, had no reason to suspect anything unusual. She thought it was just a normal plan for Suzanne, like every time she decided to go on a trip, playing with friends. But strangely, right after the call ended, Suzanne left behind some important items in the house: a wallet, a cell phone, and some personal belongings. These were clearly not the things that someone intending to leave would leave behind. This raised suspicions that something unusual was going on. Doubts about Stacy's friend. While investigating Suzanne's best friend, Stacy, the police began to notice some strange coincidences. Stacy had also had some strange conversations with her friends before her disappearance. One of Stacy's friends, Amy, recalled that in recent days, Stacy seemed anxious and not as cheerful as before. She often expressed worries about something, but refused to reveal more. It seemed like something important was going on in Stacy's life, and her close friends couldn't figure out what it was. In later interviews, Amy shared that Stacy had talked about a strange man she had met recently, someone she didn't want to name. However, Amy had no further information about this man, and Stacy never spoke of him again. Stacy's friends began to worry that this man might have something to do with the disappearances of all three women. After a long period of searching for small clues and going through every detail of the victim's past, the police began to realize that the disappearances of the three women might not have been random. The strange tracks, the unidentified calls, along with changes in the victim's behavior, could indicate that they were being followed or had found themselves in a dangerous situation from which they could not escape. Despite the many theories and strange circumstances, the truth behind this disappearance remains an unsolved mystery. A disappearance without a trace. A disappearance that leaves behind a mountain of questions and a never-ending river of theories. When seemingly simple clues fail to bring investigators closer to the truth, the case of Sherrill Levitt, Suzanne, and Stacy enters a new phase, where dark theories and suspects begin to emerge. After months of investigation without any clear progress, the police decide to expand their scope and extrapolate from the unlikely details. They no longer consider just the relationships of these three women, but begin to look at the people around them and the coincidences that have occurred in the Springfield community. The mysteries and the investigation related to them. As the case becomes more and more difficult, The investigators realize that they cannot ignore the people around them, who may have appeared at the right time and place. One of the first people the police focused on was a stranger known locally as Ricky Powell. Ricky Powell, a man who lived in the Springfield suburbs, was not a household name. However, those who lived near Powell said he had always had a strange, even somewhat aloof demeanor. Powell had had several strange conversations with neighbors about following someone for no reason. One of Ricky's neighbors reported to police that he had seen Ricky near the home where the three women went missing in the days before the incident. Ricky's presence near the Sherrill Levitt home did not appear to be a coincidence. One of the strangest things was that on the day before the three women went missing, Ricky did not show up for work and did not appear to be home. Neighbors did not recall whether he had attended any community events that day, but they did recall seeing him moving around the area in a hurry in the evening. By chance, one of Ricky's neighbors had recorded his license plate number, and this led the police to expand their investigation into Ricky Powell. They discovered that he had a criminal record involving arrests for minor crimes, but this was not enough to draw any conclusions. However, as investigators continued to dig deeper into Ricky's past, some information began to emerge. Some people in the area reported that Ricky had an unstable personality, sometimes acting strangely, and could be prone to fits of rage for no apparent reason. A quick interrogation was conducted, but Ricky still firmly denied any involvement in the disappearance. Although he seemed to have no apparent motive, investigators could not rule Ricky out of the suspect pool. They decided to continue to monitor Ricky's movements, but could not find any solid evidence to arrest him for an official investigation. Mysterious encounters and strange signs. As the investigation into Ricky Powell seemed to be going nowhere, an unexpected event occurred, causing investigators to reconsider all their assumptions. A witness, a man named Jack Stevens, volunteered a startling testimony. Stevens, a laborer in the area near the homes of the three missing women, said that he had seen a strange man appear the night before the incident. According to Stevens, the man he saw was tall, had dark hair, and had a very strange expression on his face. He was standing near a car parked near Sherrill Levitt's house, and Stevens noticed that the man seemed to be trying to avoid attention. However, not knowing who the man was, Stevens did not think much of it and continued with his work. Stevens' statement caught the attention of investigators, as it matched previous reports of a stranger near the house that evening. However, when investigating this witness, investigators could not confirm whether Stevens had actually seen what he described. Although Stevens provided some specific details about the man's appearance and location, these clues were not enough to determine who the stranger was and whether he was involved in the disappearance. The police decided to expand the investigation and look for other witnesses who might have seen the man. They checked security cameras in the area and analyzed photos that might be related to the event. After weeks of searching, they discovered a photo from a nearby security camera that showed a man who matched Stevens' description, but who was not Ricky Powell. However, although the photo may have been to help identify the stranger, the police were still unable to identify him. This once again raised suspicions about the involvement of the perpetrator in the disappearance. Perhaps this was a criminal who had chosen the right time to commit his crime, and he had meticulously planned to avoid detection. Pressure and doubt. As the investigation continued without results, the pressure began to increase on the investigators. The Springfield community began to panic, and unanswered questions continued to be asked. Why had the three women disappeared without leaving any trace? Was the perpetrator someone they knew? Or could this have been a completely random case, a strange occurrence that no one could explain? Finally, as the impasse became more severe, the investigators realized they had to change direction. They decided to pursue a completely new theory. Perhaps this disappearance was not a simple kidnapping case, but a deliberate act of a psychopath killer. With vague clues and constantly changing theories, the disappearance of Sherrill Levitt, Suzanne, and Stacy continues to be an unsolved mystery. Every step the police take, whether it is a detailed investigation of a certain character or a search for traces in the past, leads to a dead end. However, one thing is undeniable. This case is not just a story of a simple disappearance. Behind it, There may be a complex plan of a dangerous killer, and this case will continue to haunt the investigators until the truth is finally revealed. 30 years have passed since the disappearance of 3 women, Sherrill Levitt, Suzanne, and Stacy, and the questions surrounding their disappearance remain unanswered. For 3 decades, investigators, crime analysts, and the Springfield community have been unable to find a definitive answer to one of the strangest and most terrifying cases in American crime history. Although the case has become an indelible mark on everyone's hearts, will the truth ever be revealed? The hopeless wait. For 30 years, the victims' families have lived in constant pain, with the faint hope that one day the truth will be revealed. Sherrill Levitt, Suzanne, and Stacy left this world without a trace, without any indication of where they went. In the early days, police and family believed it might be a temporary disappearance, but over time it became clear that nothing could explain the disappearance. There are no tracks, no clear clues, and no answers from anyone who might know. Every year on June 7th, the day the 3 women disappeared, family members gather, remembering their memories, but also facing the reality that they may never see their loved ones again. It is an indescribable pain, a sadness that has lasted for 3 decades with no hope of healing. The investigators who worked on the case faced feelings of frustration and helplessness. They searched everywhere, from neighboring cities to the most remote areas. They conducted thousands of interviews, examined every clue, but could not come to any clear conclusions. The Springfield community, despite the long wait, still lives in confusion about what really happened that night. The biggest question remains unanswered. Why did these 3 women disappear without a trace? Last hopes. While the family and the police continue to search for answers, an unexpected event occurred in 2022. A team of independent investigators began studying the case again, determined to find the last clue. This team of investigators was not a novice, but a group of crime experts and analysts with extensive experience in strange missing persons cases. They decided to review all the clues, not missing a single detail. One of the most important findings of the investigation team was the anomalies in the reports and phone calls the victims had received before their disappearance. The calls, however brief, could not be ignored. The call Suzanne received on June 5th, a call from an unknown number, had not been given due attention before. Experts believed that this could be one of the important clues to unlocking this case. However, despite the hard work of the investigation team and the constant pursuit of new theories, they were still unable to determine who the caller was or whether this person was the perpetrator. Another theory that was put forward was that the disappearance was not a kidnapping, but a murder. Crime analysts began to suspect that the 3 women may have been targeted by a meticulously planned killer. They believed the killer may have been planning the murders for a long time and was just waiting for the right moment to strike. The clues over the years seemed to be little more than dots that didn't connect, but what the independent investigation team did was try to connect them. However, after months of work, they still couldn't find anything new. Searches in deserted areas, interviews with people who might know something, all yielded no clear results. The journey to Long Island. The killers begin to appear. In the summer of 2023, a surprising twist changed the context of the case. Investigators began to notice similarities between the disappearances of 3 women in Springfield and a string of other unsolved cases on Long Island, New York. What's remarkable is that all of these cases have something in common. The victims are all women, and all of them have disappeared mysteriously, without a trace, just like what happened to Sherrill, Suzanne, and Stacy. From clues in other cases, investigators are beginning to make a surprising connection. The killer may be a man who has killed many other victims, including women who disappeared for unknown reasons. These cases have gone unnoticed for years, but now they're slowly starting to be connected, and with each new piece of information, the truth may be coming out. What's remarkable is that this killer seems to have a very clear method and pattern of action, with his choice of vulnerable women traumatized. Investigators begin to realize that the disappearances of Sherrill, Suzanne, and Stacy may be part of a series of murders that the killer has been carrying out for years. You won't want to miss the next story, as we move on to another terrifying and mysterious case, the Long Island serial killer, where the first bodies were found on the beach, setting off a lengthy investigation and drawing everyone into a series of unsolved cases. With a killer who planned meticulously and victims who had no voice, the story of the Long Island serial killer is sure to leave you shivering. Does this case have similarities to the disappearances of Sherrill, Suzanne, and Stacy? Or could the killer still be lurking in the shadows, continuing to act undetected? Follow the Long Island serial killer documentary series to explore the unsolved mysteries and forgotten victims of this case. To learn more about the Long Island serial killer, join us in the next installment of the True Crime documentary series, where you'll be guided through intense investigations, strange clues, and secrets that have never been revealed. Explore and learn more about this macabre case, where deaths go unreported and a terrifying silence still prevails. With this story, we have reached an important part in the story of unsolved cases. Will the truth be revealed? Stay tuned for the next installment to continue the journey to explore the horrifying cases in the criminal world.